When did you realize your family tradition was actually illegal? For me, it wasn't some Hollywood-style dramatic moment. I was just sitting at home, casually believing everything was normal, until I realized that so-called normal could land my whole family on the evening crime report. Sounds like a Netflix plot, right? But that was literally my life. Ever heard of age 13 as the expiration date for freedom? I had. In my family, the second a girl blew out her 13th birthday candles, she instantly turned into a limited edition product. Just like the latest iPhone, fresh out of the box, and you've got to activate it right away with a marriage. Sounds strange, right? I used to think it was just a little weird, not something actually illegal. Back then, it felt more like a business deal. My family was blunt. The younger the girl, the higher the value. Wait too long, she depreciates. Sorry, it sounds ridiculous, but that's literally what they said. In my mind, marriage was just another kind of transaction, like selling a house or a car. The buyers were older men in the community, and the sellers, well, my own parents. I grew up in a small town where everyone seemed okay with it. My neighbor Lily disappeared right after summer break in 7th grade. Her parents bragged that Lily found a good home. I even remember feeling a little jealous. Wow, she didn't have to do math anymore. There was even a moment I daydreamed. Maybe my future husband would be some rich sugar daddy straight out of a Hollywood movie. Spoiler, it was just a dream. Reality, not even close. But this so-called tradition didn't stop at early marriage. My family had another ritual that still makes me want to crawl into a hole when I think about it. They called it a virginity test. To be blunt, before announcing a girl was ready for marriage, there would be a humiliating ceremony. The adults, always the women in the family, would gather and examine your body. No doctor, no clinic, just pure torment wrapped up in the word tradition. I remember the first time I witnessed it. I was 10 years old, clutching my Barbie doll, when I saw my cousin Zoe dragged into the living room, where a group of women were waiting. I tiptoed outside the door. I heard her muffled sobs, followed by an old aunt yelling, "This girl is pure, she's qualified." Everyone clapped like they'd just heard someone got into Harvard. At that age, I didn't fully get it. In my childish mind, I thought, oh, maybe it's like a pre-marriage health check, like getting your eyes tested before a driver's license. When I told a classmate about it, she almost choked on her milk. Girl, that sounds like a horror movie. I even laughed back. Haha, family edition horror film. Honestly, I didn't think it was wrong. To me, it was tradition. Weird, sure, but still, tradition. If everyone did it, how could it possibly be illegal? There was even this one family gathering where my grandma bragged about it like it was some treasure. Back in my day, I went through that ceremony too. That's how I landed your grandpa. Everyone burst out laughing, teasing like, blessings from tradition. I just sat there, confused but laughing along. You know that feeling when the whole room is cheering for something twisted and you start convincing yourself, maybe I'm the odd one out, maybe this is just culture. The funniest part, well, funniest in the darkest way, was how they dressed the whole thing up like a party. After the test, the family would throw a backyard barbecue. Kids danced around while the adults discussed which man was the best candidate for the freshly certified girl. I remember at Zoe's, at least 3 mustached uncles showed up with food just to score points. To me, it looked exactly like a cheerful little auction. I was chomping on a hot dog thinking, wow, Zoe's really popular. Telling it now gives me goosebumps, but back then, I didn't feel humiliated for her at all. I thought it was just part of my family's business system. And according to my mom, that system made sure no daughter went to waste. Creepy as it sounds, when you grow up in that environment, you just assume it must be right. Like believing in Santa Claus until you grow up and realize, oh, it was just your parents in costume the whole time. So, when I turned 12 and my aunts started looking at me like they were pricing beef at the supermarket, I still didn't feel worried. I even told myself, I'll probably get a fun barbecue like Zoe. The only problem was, I absolutely hated being touched, and the virginity test didn't let you say no. One night I asked my mom, what if I don't want to? She shot me a look as sharp as an apple peeler and casually replied, tradition isn't about wanting. It's a responsibility. I nodded, then turned to mock myself in the mirror. Congratulations, Tara. You've just been upgraded from a human to a product. At that time, I didn't know a single thing about the law. I just thought, traditions must be legal. I was completely wrong, but that aha moment would come. And trust me, it doesn't show up like a harmless pop-up on your computer. It slams into you like a hot cast iron pan. But that's a story for later. After all those times of hearing my aunts whisper about it, I finally got to see the official version of this tradition. My cousin Zoe, the same one I saw dragged off for that virginity test, suddenly got the announcement. She was going to walk down the aisle with a widowed pastor, over 30, salt and pepper hair, with a preaching voice that boomed like a church speaker. The day I heard the news, I was like, "You've got to be kidding." She's only 17 and looks like she's about to run the marathon of forced marriages. The wedding happened so fast, nobody had time to blink. 1 week earlier, Zoe was in my room chewing gum, complaining about her chemistry homework. A week later, she was in a white dress, standing next to a man twice her age, clutching a Bible like her entire life was just an extension of Sunday service. I sat in the back row, trying not to laugh, thinking, wow, so my family's tradition just got updated to the premium religious edition. What shocked me even more was how perfectly disguised the whole wedding was. Nobody called it forced marriage. They called it a religious ceremony. The church was dressed up with balloons, paper flowers, and white-covered tables. Everyone in the community showed up in their best clothes, clapping and smiling. The adults nodded along, saying, "Such a sacred union." I sat there thinking it looked more like a cheap Broadway knockoff. Zoe's face was pale, her lips trembling, clearly on the verge of tears, but she still had to smile to please the audience. I remember when the pastor read the vows, part of it sounded like it was copy-pasted from an insurance policy. This young wife shall uphold tradition, serve her husband, and preserve the family's honor. I almost let out a sarcastic laugh, but bit my lip because my mom was right next to me. In my head, I thought, if this is what they call sacred love, then frozen pizza should be considered hot cuisine. Everything looked so legal that even I was fooled for a moment. They invited the local sheriff, even a few small-town officials. Everyone smiled, shook hands, and offered blessings. I imagined if some outsider wandered in, they'd probably think, oh, just a normal wedding. But to me, every detail reeked of fakery, like a birthday party where the cake is actually made of cardboard. While everyone was busy snapping photos, I caught Zoe's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a happy bride. They were the eyes of someone locked in from the outside. A chill ran through me. I wondered, would I one day be shoved onto that same stage? Then came the twist. I was squirming in my seat when I noticed a stranger. He wasn't dressed like anyone from our community, not clapping along, not faking smiles. Just a middle-aged man in a plain shirt, loosened tie, standing at the back of the hall with a notebook in hand. He didn't talk to anyone, just watched. Every so often, he nodded, then quickly jotted something down. At first, I thought he must be a journalist, but when I saw him standing next to someone in a town uniform, a thought hit me. Wait, this isn't just some random guest. Could he be a social worker? Or maybe local law enforcement? I stared so hard that my mom elbowed me, frowning. Stop being nosy. I pretended to look away, but inside me, a question started bubbling up. One I'd never even considered before. If this really was a legal religious ceremony, then why was someone from the government watching? For the rest of the reception, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He didn't touch a glass of wine, didn't pose for pictures with anyone. He just stood there, observing like he was assessing a crime scene. For the first time in my life, I felt something was seriously off. It wasn't the kind of fun tradition I kept telling myself it was. It was something serious enough to bring outsiders in to investigate. When Zoe left the ceremony, her face hidden behind the veil, I saw that man's eyes follow her. Not with curiosity, but with the heavy look of someone who already knew the truth. I bit my lip, my heart pounding. For the first time, a clear question echoed in my head. Was what my family called tradition really as legal as they claimed? That night, lying in bed, I could still hear the laughter and chatter from the living room where everyone was celebrating. But instead of thinking about the party, I couldn't shake the image of the stranger with his little notebook. For the first time, tradition didn't feel like just a business deal anymore. It felt like a rigged game someone from the outside had started to expose. And me, though I wasn't ready to admit it yet, I had begun to feel the cracks forming in my own naive belief. After Zoe's wedding, I lived in this weird limbo, part fear, part comfort in thinking I was still safe because my body hadn't caught up to puberty yet. For years, I managed to slip by, pretending to be frail, eating erratically, hiding the truth that I was still just a kid with nothing for anyone to be interested in. In my family, the slower you were to become a woman, the longer you could stretch your shelf life. I used to laugh at myself whenever I thought about it, like I was a carton of milk in the fridge with its expiration date extended by freezing. But no cheat lasts forever. When I turned 16, my body betrayed me. My period came one autumn morning while I was still hunched over geometry homework. I froze, face pale, and instantly knew the hourglass had been flipped. In my head, I whispered, "Game over, Tara, the clock just ran out." News spread faster than my neighbor's Wi-Fi. That afternoon, my mom walked into my room with this bizarre look of triumph, like I'd just won some prestigious award. She said, "Finally, you're ready. The whole family will be so thrilled." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The only thought echoing in my head was, I never signed any contract, so how am I suddenly being shoved into the biggest deal of my life? Less than a week later, my family arranged a gathering with the so-called candidates. But it wasn't some stranger. It was the town's mayor. He was younger than my dad, with neatly cut hair, a soft paunch, and that smug smile of someone who holds power. When he shook my hand, the mix of cheap cologne and cigar smoke made me want to gag. I tried to pull away, but my mom's hand clamped down on my shoulder, her grip a silent warning. That night, sitting across from the mayor at dinner, I listened to his promises of a stable future. He bragged about giving me a big house, a full wardrobe, and even claimed, "Marrying young helps my career. It makes me look family-oriented and moral." I picked at each grain of rice, trying not to drop my chopsticks because my hands were shaking. All I could think was, I'm not a campaign poster for you to parade around. In the days that followed, the house turned into a full-on campaign headquarters for the wedding. My mom talked about dresses, my dad discussed dowries, and my aunts argued over which venue would save face for the family. I was basically invisible, sitting there swallowing every word like a bitter pill stuck in my throat. Then one evening, while I was numbing myself in front of the TV, I stumbled onto a news channel. The reporter was covering a forced marriage case in another state. The girl was only 14, forced by her family to marry an older man. But here was the twist. The authorities had stepped in, rescued her, and dragged her family to court. I froze. My heart pounded, the remote slipping from my hand onto the floor. I whispered, "Wait, what? Rescued? The family taken to court?" The words hit me like a hammer. Suddenly, all the scattered puzzle pieces clicked together. Zoe's wedding, the stranger's watchful eyes, the whispers about laws. For the first time in my life, I realized what we called tradition wasn't some beautiful culture, wasn't just a normal transaction. It was a crime. I remember shooting upright, eyes glued to the screen. The reporter stated clearly, "Forced marriages of minors are illegal, regardless of parental consent or religious justification." Each word was like a brick falling from the wall of lies in my head. I nearly shouted, "Oh my God, everything they forced on us, it really is against the law." The feeling was equal parts panic and absurd comedy. I had spent 16 years believing my family was just following some age-old custom. I used to think outsiders didn't get it. I used to scoff when friends said it was wrong. But now, the TV, the same thing I leaned on during sleepless nights, had just smacked me in the face with the truth. "Girl, this isn't tradition. This is a crime." I shut off the TV and sat frozen. Memories came crashing down. Zoe in her white wedding dress, her pleading eyes, the backyard barbecues after those so-called tests, my mother's reminder that this was my responsibility. Now it all felt like evidence for the prosecution. I clutched my head, laughing half-crazed, half-sober. My tradition is a crime. My family is a cartel, and I'm the merchandise. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard my parents laughing and talking in the living room, planning a bright future thanks to the marriage with the mayor. Meanwhile, I curled up, trembling with anger. That was the moment I could finally answer the question I'd never dared to ask. When did I realize my family's tradition was actually illegal? It was then, staring at the TV, when the truth exploded like fireworks, when I couldn't pretend for even one more second. After the night the TV woke me up, everything inside me changed. If before I only complained quietly or made jokes to myself, now I knew for sure I couldn't stay idle. When the family began preparing the engagement ceremony with the mayor, I hatched a plan so bold it even sounded crazy to me. To flip the trap back on them, right on the stage they had set up. That day, the town hall was decorated like it was some kind of national holiday. Paper flowers hung everywhere, tables draped in white cloth, Everyone dressed to the nines. I wore the red dress my mom forced on me, feeling like I was walking a catwalk in a prison fashion show. As the music started, I stepped out, faking a smile like a blissful bride. Inside, though, every heartbeat pounded like an alarm drum. The ceremony opened with blessings followed by the mayor's speech. He went on and on about precious traditions and love that unites the community. I sat there, trying not to roll my eyes. Then it was my turn with the microphone. The whole room fell silent, expecting some humble words of gratitude. But instead of reciting the script, I took a deep breath, pulled out the folded paper I had hidden in my sleeve, and began to read. "The law is very clear," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. "All forms of forced marriage involving minors are illegal. No religious exceptions, no fake consent. This is a crime." The sound in the hall shattered. Some people's jaws dropped. Others choked on their drinks at the worst possible moment. I pressed on, louder. "I'm 16 years old. I'm being forced into marriage, and what you're witnessing here is a crime, not a ceremony." The entire room erupted like a marketplace gone mad. My mother shot to her feet, face drained white before flushing red. My father lunged forward to snatch the mic, but I gripped it tight. I kept reading every line on that sheet. Clauses against child marriage, the rights of minors, the duty of officials to report abuse. Each word cut like a blade through the shiny shell of tradition my family had built all these years. And then came the twist. An outsider, I guessed maybe a random guest or a friend of someone, was live streaming the entire scene on social media. I had no idea when he'd started, but when I glanced down, I saw a few kids in the hall whispering, "Oh my God, there are thousands of people watching already." I froze, then burst out laughing inside. Perfect. If my family wanted a performance, then this was a show with a global audience. By the time I finished, the hall exploded. Half the room was shocked, the other half furious. Chairs scraped, whispers turned to shouts. Online, the livestream blew up with comments. People demanding I be rescued, people condemning the so-called tradition, people typing in all caps cursing out the mayor. The internet didn't care about the backstory. They just saw a teenage girl reading child marriage laws at her own engagement party, and instantly, they were on my side. My family lost it. My mom grabbed my arm and hissed, "Are you insane? You've disgraced the culture of our entire bloodline." My dad shouted into the mic that I'd been brainwashed by outside media. The mayor gave an awkward laugh, trying to put out the fire. "This is just a misunderstanding. The girl's a little emotional." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They murmured, pointed, and more than a few started sneaking out their phones to record. Right after, my family launched a full-on campaign to paint me as the traitor. They rushed from table to table, telling people I had brought shame to the community, that I didn't understand tradition, that I was mocking religion. My aunts even cried dramatically, wailing that I'd ruined Zoe's happiness and the futures of other girls. But their excuses didn't stand a chance against the social media storm already crashing down. I stood in the middle of the storm, cold sweat running down my spine. Part of me was terrified, but another part felt exhilarated. For the first time, the story wasn't in my family's hands anymore. It had broken free, flying beyond the hall, beyond this tiny town. I didn't know what price I would pay, but at least in that moment, I had taken back my own voice. And the world, the entire online world, was listening. When the engagement party turned into a live-stream firestorm, things escalated faster than I ever imagined. Just a few hours later, the local police knocked on our door. Not to arrest me, as my family probably hoped, but to take me away. They used words I never thought would apply to me. Witness protection program. It sounded like something out of a mafia movie, but suddenly I was the witness in a case against my own family. With my heart pounding, I stuffed a few clothes into a backpack, terrified, yet secretly thinking, so this is my upgrade. Not the latest iPhone, but the beta version of an international witness. They moved me into a temporary safe apartment at a secret location, with a new phone number, and even a new name. They called me Case 47B. I laughed to myself. At least it sounded kind of cool, like a hacker code. But deep down, I knew this was no joke. To my family, I was now the traitor, and they wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to silence me. In the first days, I lived like a ghost. No school, no friends, just white walls and the hum of a ceiling fan. I ate instant noodles, slept in fits and starts, and every time a car passed outside, my heart would jump into my throat. Then one night, there was a soft knock at the window. I panicked, thinking my family had found me. When the curtain fluttered, I saw a familiar face. My cousin, Kyle. Kyle was the kind of person the family always kept an eye on. He'd lost his sister to this tradition. She was forced into marriage too young and later died from complications after multiple pregnancies. Since then, Kyle had been quiet, withdrawn, almost pushed out of family gatherings. But I always remembered his eyes, sad but burning with fire. He whispered, "Come with me. It won't be safe here forever." I hesitated. The witness protection program sounded solid, but I knew my family had wide connections. Kyle was the only person I felt I could trust. I opened the door, my heart pounding like a war drum. We slipped out into the night, walking through dark alleys and avoiding cameras. Kyle led me to a tiny rented room he'd prepared, a few changes of clothes, some cash, and an old laptop. "I couldn't save my sister," he said, his eyes red, "but I won't let you go through the same tragedy." I collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down. For years I thought every relative stood on the side of tradition. But right in front of me was someone from my own bloodline who had chosen to be my ally. It was a twist I never saw coming, and the turning point that saved my life. In the weeks that followed, Kyle and I lived like fugitives. By day, I read law books and practiced writing down everything I'd been through. By night, we plotted, not just to hide, but to turn my story into a beacon for other girls. Kyle pushed me to write, to share, to speak from the perspective of someone who had lived it. One morning, I opened the laptop and created a Reddit account. I typed out a post titled, "My family called it tradition. The law called it a crime." Here's my story. My hands shook as I hit post, convinced no one would care. But within hours, hundreds of comments poured in. Some were shocked, some cried, some shared their own experiences. By the end of the day, the post was trending at the top. I read every line, crying and laughing at the same time. One person commented, "Girl, you're not alone. Thank you for speaking up." Another wrote, "You just saved my niece. Showing this to her parents right now." And of course, there were trolls. "Your family needs to update their laws from the Stone Age." I laughed through my tears. For the first time, I realized the internet wasn't just a place for cat memes. It was a real community standing with me. My family fought back. They made fake accounts accusing me of shaming our culture and making up stories for attention. But the wave of support was too strong. Redditors didn't believe them. In fact, they clapped back hard. One comment stood out. "If tradition hurts kids, it's not culture, it's abuse." I screenshotted it and taped it to my wall as a reminder. From then on, I joined online advocacy groups against child marriage and forced marriage. We created resources, shared hotlines, and supported survivors. I told my story in Zoom calls. Sometimes my voice shook, but every time I saw dozens of young faces nodding along, I knew I was doing the right thing. And then I realized something simple. Sometimes you can't see the truth until an outsider points it out. I once needed the cold, steady gaze of that social worker at Zoe's wedding. I once needed the TV anchor spelling it out. "This is a crime." And now, maybe I'm that outsider for other girls, the one willing to say, "This tradition isn't legal. It isn't sacred. It's just a chain." As I type these words, I can't claim I'm completely safe. But I'm not the same. I'm no longer the trembling child in the red dress. I'm Tara, the one who dared to expose a toxic tradition with my own voice. And if a single word of mine can save even one girl, then everything I've been through was worth it. Because sometimes, it only takes one person standing up for an entire generation after them to finally sit down and breathe free. Maybe the biggest lesson I've learned is this. Tradition isn't automatically right just because it's old. If something hurts people, no fancy word can make it sacred. Sometimes, to break free, all you need is one clear moment of courage to say, no. And what about you? If one day you discovered that a tradition in your family was actually breaking the law and defying common sense, would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you stand up and expose it? I truly want to hear your answer in the comments. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story.